Welcome, friends, to another journey into the shadowed corners of history. Tonight, we'll be unraveling not just one, but a tapestry of mysteries, each one a thread leading us deeper into the unknown. We'll explore lost civilizations, baffling artifacts, unexplained disappearances, and figures shrouded in legend. Prepare to settle in, let your mind wander, and allow the echoes of the past to wash over you. We have a long and winding road ahead, filled with whispers of what might have been, or perhaps, what still might be. Our journey begins with the enigmatic. Imagine a crisp autumn day and a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman, toiling on his land near Kensington, Minnesota, stumbles upon something extraordinary. Buried beneath the roots of an aspen tree, he unearths a heavy slab of gray wax stone, its surface covered in strange, angular symbols. These, he soon learns, are runes, the ancient alphabet of the Norse. The Kensington runestone, as it came to be known, is a hefty artifact, roughly 30 inches high, 16 inches wide, and 6 inches thick. It's not something you'd easily overlook, but it's the inscription carved into its face that truly captivates and sparks a controversy that has raged for over a century. If authentic, the runestone's message paints a breathtaking picture. It speaks of a group of Norse explorers, far from their Scandinavian homeland, venturing deep into the heart of North America in the year 30. That's more than a century before Columbus's famed voyage. The inscription translated reads something like this: 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on this exploration journey from Vinland through the west. We had camped by 2 skerries one day's journey north from this stone. We were fishing one day. After we came home, found 10 men red with blood and dead. AVM area, save us from evil. Have 10 men by the sea to look after our ships. 14 days' journey from this island. Year 62. A chilling tale, isn't it? A desperate plea carved in stone. A testament to a lost expedition. A possible hint of a violent encounter. And a date that, if true, rewrites the history book. It suggests that Norse explorers not only reached the shores of North America, as we know they did with the settlement at Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland, but that they penetrated far inland, perhaps navigating the Great Lakes and river systems. But, and here's where the mystery deepens, the authenticity of the Kensington runestone has been fiercely debated since the moment of its discovery. Doubts arose almost immediately. Linguists, archaeologists, and historians have scrutinized every detail, every rune, every aspect of the stone's story. The first major hurdle is the language itself. While the runes are undeniably Norse, the language used in the inscription presents problems. Some words and grammatical forms appear to be more consistent with 19th-century Scandinavian dialects, the language spoken by Olof Oman and his contemporaries, rather than the Old Norse of the 14th century. This raises a red flag. Would a group of 14th-century explorers use linguistic forms that wouldn't evolve for another 500 years? Then there's the matter of the runes themselves. Runologists, experts in the study of runic alphabets, have pointed out inconsistencies in the style and form of some of the runes. Certain characters seem to be anachronistic, not matching the types of runes commonly used in the 14th century. This further fuels the skepticism. Beyond the linguistic and runic anomalies, there's the geological evidence, or lack thereof. The stone itself, greywack, is common to the region, but the weathering of the inscription has been a point of contention. Some geologists have argued that the weathering patterns are consistent with a carving that is centuries old. Others, however, claim that the inscription shows signs of having been made much more recently, possibly around the time of its discovery. The sharpness of some of the cuts, the lack of significant erosion in certain areas, these details raise questions. And then there's the context of the discovery itself. The late 19th century was a time of great interest in Norse history and Viking exploration, particularly among Scandinavian immigrants in the American Midwest. There was a strong desire to find evidence of a Norse presence in the region, to connect their heritage to the land they now called home. This cultural climate, some historians argue, could have provided a motive for a home. Could Olof Oman, or someone he knew, have created the runestone as a deliberate forgery, a way to generate excitement, perhaps even to boost tourism or land values? The initial reception of the runestone was a mix of excitement and skepticism. Local newspapers trumpeted the discovery, portraying it as proof of a pre-Columbian Norse presence in Minnesota. But academics were far more cautious. The stone was sent to various universities for examination, and the opinions were sharply divided. One of the earliest and most vocal skeptics was Professor George Kermay, a respected linguist at Northwestern University. He pointed out the linguistic anachronisms and declared the stone a modern forgery. His opinion carried considerable weight, and for many years the runestone was largely dismissed as a hoax. However, the story didn't end there. A dedicated amateur historian named Hjalmar Holland championed the runestone's authenticity for decades. He wrote extensively about it, gathered supporting evidence, or what he believed to be supporting evidence, and tirelessly promoted the idea of a 14th-century Norse expedition to Minnesota. Holland's passion kept the debate alive, and the runestone became a local icon, a symbol of Kensington's unique and disputed place in history. Over the years, various theories and counter-theories have been proposed. Some have suggested that the runestone might be a genuine 14th-century artifact, but that the inscription was altered or recarved in the 19th century, perhaps by someone who found the stone and wanted to make it more legible, or to enhance its message. This recarving theory attempts to reconcile the linguistic inconsistencies with the possibility of an older origin. Others have proposed even more elaborate scenarios. Could the runestone have been created by a group of Swedish immigrants who were knowledgeable about runes and Old Norse, but who deliberately used archaic language to create a sense of antiquity? This theory suggests a sophisticated hoax, one designed to deceive not just the general public, but also experts. The debate continues to this day. Modern technology such as laser scanning and advanced linguistic analysis has been applied to the runestone, but the results remain inconclusive. The mystery persists. The Kensington runestone sits in a museum in Alexandria, Minnesota, a silent testament to a puzzle that may never be fully solved. It's a reminder that history is not always clear-cut, that even the most seemingly straightforward artifacts can hold layers of ambiguity and intrigue. Let's pause here for a moment and consider the implications of the Kensington runestone. If it is genuine, it forces us to reevaluate our understanding of North American history. It suggests a level of Norse exploration far beyond what is currently accepted. It hints at a possible contact between Norse explorers and indigenous populations, centuries before Columbus. But if it's a forgery, it's a testament to the power of human ingenuity, the desire to create narratives, and the enduring appeal of a good mystery. It's a reminder that hoaxes too can have a profound impact on our understanding of the past. Either way, the Kensington runestone serves as a powerful introduction to our journey. It's a story that embodies the essence of historical mysteries, a tantalizing artifact, conflicting evidence, passionate advocates on both sides, and an enduring question mark that hangs over the entire narrative. And it will be used as an intro to our next story. What if I told you that somewhere, at one point in time, there was a continent, or perhaps even a microcontinent? It was, at least at one point, above the waves, before it sunk into the abyss. Welcome to the Kerguelen Plateau. The Kerguelen Plateau, nestled in the southern Indian Ocean, is a colossal underwater volcanic plateau, approximately 3 times the size of Japan. It's a submerged landmass of immense proportions, a hidden world beneath the waves. But what makes it truly intriguing is the persistent question: could this plateau once have been a lost continent? The story of the Kerguelen Plateau begins, like many geological tales, deep in the Earth's fiery past. Around 130 million years ago, during the Cretaceous period, a massive upwelling of magma from the Earth's mantle, known as the Kerguelen hotspot, began to erupt. This volcanic activity, over millions of years, created a vast expanse of basaltic lava flows, forming what we now know as the Kerguelen Plateau, and its neighboring feature, the Broken Ridge. Initially, parts of this plateau were above sea level. Imagine a substantial landmass, rising from the ocean, teeming with life, a lost world perhaps. Geological evidence suggests that the plateau experienced multiple phases of volcanic activity, adding to its complex structure, and at times increasing its elevation. But over time, a process known as subsidence began to take hold. The cooling of the Earth's lithosphere, the rigid outer layer, combined with possible tectonic movements, caused the plateau to gradually sink. Slowly but surely, this once substantial landmass was swallowed by the sea. Today, the vast majority of the Kerguelen Plateau lies submerged, beneath 3,000 to 6,000 feet of water. Only a few fragments remain above sea level, forming the remote and windswept Kerguelen Islands and Heard Island. These islands, stark and isolated, are the only visible remnants of a much larger geological entity. So what evidence suggests that the Kerguelen Plateau might have been a lost continent? Several lines of inquiry have fueled this intriguing possibility. First, there's the matter of the rocks themselves. While much of the plateau is composed of basalt, typical of oceanic crust, studies have identified rocks, such as granites, that are more commonly associated with continental crust. This suggests that parts of the plateau may have originated from continental material, remnants of a larger landmass that was torn apart by tectonic forces. Then there are the fossils. Discoveries of ancient coniferous trees and other plant fossils on the plateau indicate that it once supported terrestrial ecosystems. This is a crucial piece of evidence. It suggests that substantial portions of the plateau were above sea level for a significant period, allowing life to flourish. It also raises the possibility that the plateau was connected to other land masses, facilitating the migration of species. Further adding to the mystery is the composition of sedimentary rocks found on the plateau. These rocks show similarities to those found in regions like India and Australia. This geological connection suggests that the Kerguelen Plateau was once part of the supercontinent Gondwana, a massive landmass that began to break apart around 180 million years ago. As Gondwana fragmented, the plateau became isolated and eventually submerged. These pieces of evidence, the continental-type rocks, the fossil discoveries, and the geological similarities to other landmasses, paint a picture of a lost world, a once significant landmass that has vanished beneath the wave. It's a tantalizing concept, one that evokes images of a forgotten continent, teeming with unique flora and fauna, now lost to the depths. But, and as with all good mysteries, there's a but. There are arguments against classifying the Kerguelen Plateau as a lost continent. While there are indications of continental material, the vast majority of the plateau is, as mentioned, composed of basaltic rock, typical of oceanic crust. This suggests that the plateau may not meet the strict criteria of a true continent, which is primarily defined by its continental crust composition. Also, the very definition of a continent is somewhat ambiguous. It typically includes considerations of size, elevation, and the presence of a distinct continental shelf. While the Kerguelen Plateau is undeniably extensive, its predominantly submerged state and its geological composition raise questions about whether it truly qualifies as a continent. The debate, like the plateau itself, remains largely submerged in the realm of scientific discussion. The evidence is suggestive, intriguing, but not entirely conclusive. The Kerguelen Plateau may be best described as a microcontinent, or a submerged continental fragment, a remnant of a larger landmass that has been lost to geological time. The story of the Kerguelen Plateau, like the Kensington Run Stone, highlights the challenges of reconstructing the distant past. We rely on fragmented evidence, geological clues, and scientific interpretation to piece together a narrative that is by its very nature incomplete. But the very act of exploring these mysteries, of considering the possibilities, expands our understanding of the Earth's dynamic history. It reminds us that the world we see today is just a snapshot in time, that continents shift, oceans rise and fall, and that even the most seemingly permanent features of our planet are subject to change. And the Kerguelen Plateau isn't the only underwater city we'll hear about on our journey. Our next story takes us to a very different landscape, the rugged Black Hills of South Dakota, a land of gold rushes, outlaws, and enduring legend. This is the tale of Lem Johnny Donahue, a man whose life was a mix of academic promise, criminal exploits, and a lost treasure that continues to tantalize treasure hunters to this day. Cornelius Donahue, born around 1850 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, didn't start out as a notorious outlaw. In fact, his early life showed signs of a very different path. He attended Girard College, a prestigious institution for orphaned and impoverished boys, where he excelled academically and was known for his good conduct. Imagine a future outlaw, praised for his exemplary behavior. But life, as it often does, took unexpected turns. Donahue's ventures into legitimate professions faltered. He tried his hand as a cowboy in Texas, but that didn't stick. It was in Texas, however,
that rumors began to circulate, whispers of cattle rustling, a hint of the outlaw life to come. Drawn by the allure of gold, Donahue moved to the Black Hills in 1876, joining the throngs of prospectors seeking their fortune. He worked various jobs: a deputy in Custer County, a bookkeeper for the Homestake Mining Company. But his past, like a shadow, caught up with him. A Texan recognized him as a horse thief, leading to his dismissal. It was then that Donahue, now known as Lem Johnny, due to a pronounced limp, fully embraced the outlaw life. He formed a gang, a motley crew of desperados, and they embarked on a spree of horse theft, cattle rustling, and stagecoach robberies. But it was one particular heist that cemented Lem Johnny's place in Wild West lore. On September 26, 1878, his gang ambushed the Monitor, an armored stagecoach carrying a fortune in valuables from the Homestake mine. The ambush took place at Canyon Spring Station, a remote outpost in the Black Hill. The gang's haul was staggering: approximately $3,500 in currency, $500 in diamonds, and a whopping 700 pounds of gold dust, nuggets, and bullion. To put that in perspective, 700 pounds of gold today would be worth millions of dollars. It was a heist that sent shockwaves through the region, prompting a massive manhunt. The authorities, spurred by the Homestake Mining Company's determination to recover its gold, launched an intense pursuit. Lem Johnny and his gang scattered, but their luck was running out. In July 1879, authorities captured Lem Johnny near the Pine Ridge Reservation. He was being transported to Deadwood for trial when a masked vigilante mob intercepted the stagecoach near Buffalo Gap. This was frontier justice, swift and brutal. The mob, fueled by a thirst for vengeance and the lure of the lost gold, demanded to know the location of the hidden treasure. Lem Johnny, perhaps defiant, perhaps resigned to his fate, refused to reveal the secret. The vigilantes, their patience exhausted, forcibly removed him from the coach. They hanged him from a nearby elm tree, leaving his body shackled as a grim warning. The legend of Lem Johnny's lost treasure was born. To this day, many believe that a portion of the stolen gold remains hidden somewhere in the Black Hills. Treasure hunters, armed with metal detectors, maps, and whispers of old stories, continue to search for the elusive cache. But the treasure, if it still exists, has never been found. It remains an enduring mystery, a tantalizing piece of Wild West lore. Did Lem Johnny's gang members recover the gold? Did corrupt officials find it and keep quiet? Or is it still out there, buried beneath the rugged landscape, waiting to be discovered? Personally, I have doubts. It seems unlikely that such a large amount of gold could remain hidden for so long, especially given the intense scrutiny and the passage of time. But the legend persists, fueled by the romantic image of a hidden outlaw treasure and the enduring appeal of a good mystery. The story of Lem Johnny and his gang's last stand brings our first segment to an end. We hope you enjoyed it. The Matsakawa derailment, a name that echoes with intrigue, conspiracy, and a lingering sense of injustice. This incident, which occurred in Japan on August 17, 1949, remains one of the most controversial and widely discussed railway disasters in the country's post-war history. It began, as many tragedies do, in the pre-dawn darkness. At around 3, a passenger train traveling from Aomori to Tokyo on the Tohoku Main Line derailed near Matsakawa Station in Fukushima Prefecture. The locomotive and several cars toppled over, resulting in the deaths of 3 railway employees. In the immediate aftermath, the scene was one of chaos and confusion. But amidst the wreckage and the grief, a narrative began to emerge. A narrative of sabotage. Japan in 1949 was a nation grappling with the aftermath of a devastating war. The country was under Allied occupation, facing severe economic hardship, labor unrest, and intense ideological conflict between leftist and rightist factions. It was a volatile time, a period of profound social and political upheaval. In this charged atmosphere, the authorities were quick to suspect foul play. They believed that the derailment wasn't a mere accident, but a deliberate act of sabotage, intended to undermine the stability of the nation's critical infrastructure. Suspicion quickly fell on members of the Japan Communist Party, JCP, and affiliated labor unions, including the National Railway Workers Union. These groups were seen as a threat to the established order, and the government, with the backing of the Allied occupation forces, was actively suppressing leftist movements. The historical context is crucial to understanding the Matsakawa case. 1949 saw 2 other high-profile railway incidents: The Shimoyama Incident. The mysterious death of Japan National Railways President Sadanori Shimoyama. And the Mitaka Incident. A runaway train incident. These events, all occurring within a short span of time, fueled an atmosphere of fear and suspicion, creating a
Investigators
climate
believe
ripe
that
for
radical
conspiracy
elements
theories.
within the labor movement, possibly with Soviet backing, had orchestrated the Matsukawa derailment to foment social unrest and destabilize the government. The Cold War was in its early stages, and fears of communist infiltration were rampant. The government, focused on suppressing leftist ideologies, saw the Matsukawa incident as an opportunity to crack down on potential dissidents. This backdrop set the stage for a trial that would become a symbol of political persecution and judicial overreach. By October 1949, police had arrested a number of individuals, most of whom were union members or affiliated with the JCP. Ultimately, 20 people were charged and brought to trial in connection with the derailment. The prosecution's case rested on the argument that the defendants had conspired to sabotage the railway, alleging that they had removed a metal plate securing the rails, causing the derailment. The evidence, however, was largely circumstantial. The defense countered that the evidence was flimsy, that confessions had been coerced through harsh interrogation methods, and that the derailment could have been caused by technical or operational issues unrelated to sabotage. They argued that the prosecution's case was driven by a political agenda, a desire to silence leftist voices. The first round of decisions in the lower courts found several defendants guilty. In 1953, the Sendai District Court delivered its verdict, convicting many of the accused and sentencing some to death. The harshness of these rulings shocked observers both in Japan and internationally. Human rights organizations and Japanese legal advocates criticized the lack of direct evidence and the possibility of confessions obtained under duress. Appeals were filed, and the case moved up the judicial ladder, eventually landing in the Tohoku High Court. In a surprising turn of events, the Tohoku High Court, in 1959, overturned the lower court's ruling, acquitting all 20 defendants. This acquittal was a landmark moment in Japan's post-war legal history, a rebuke to the prosecution's case and a victory for the defense. But the prosecution refused to accept the verdict. They appealed to the Supreme Court of Japan, the highest court in the land. The Supreme Court meticulously scrutinized the evidence, examined testimony, and considered allegations that the authorities might have manipulated or suppressed critical information. It wasn't until 1963 that the Supreme Court finally upheld the High Court's acquittal verdict. The final court decision concluded that there was insufficient evidence to prove that any of the accused had intentionally removed the track fastenings. The ruling also highlighted deficiencies in the investigation, including mishandled evidence, questionable interrogation tactics, and government overreach in targeting political opponents. The Matsukawa derailment case ultimately became a cautionary tale about the dangers of political persecution, the importance of due process, and the fragility of justice in times of social and political upheaval. The case was officially closed in 1970 without any definitive conclusion as to the actual cause of the derailment. Was it a tragic accident, a result of infrastructure failure in a war-ravaged nation, or was it a deliberate act of sabotage, a plot that was never fully uncovered? The mystery remains. The Matsukawa derailment stands as a stark reminder of a turbulent period in Japanese history, a time when fear, suspicion, and political maneuvering overshadowed the pursuit of truth. Ragnar Lothbrok. The name conjures images of a legendary Viking warrior, a fearless raider, a king who carved his name into the annals of history, or perhaps into the realm of myth. The question of Ragnar's historicity, whether he was a real flesh-and-blood individual or a composite figure woven from the deeds of multiple Viking leaders, is one of the most enduring mysteries of the Viking Age. Ragnar's story as we know it comes primarily from medieval sources, particularly the Old Norse sagas and the Gesta Danorum Deeds of the Danes by Saxo Grammaticus. These texts, written centuries after the events they describe, portray Ragnar as a larger-than-life figure, a warrior king of extraordinary prowess and cunning. He's depicted as the son of a Swedish king named Sigurd Ring and as the father of several notable Vikings, including Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye. These sons, according to the sagas, would go on to lead their own expeditions, conquer kingdoms, and become legendary figures in their own right. One of the most famous narratives associated with Ragnar is his capture and death at the hands of King Ola of Northumbria in the mid-9th century. Medieval chronicles and later retellings claim that Ragnar led raids into the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, where he was eventually defeated, captured, and thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. The image of Ragnar, defiant even in death, reciting heroic poetry as the snakes consume him, has become one of the most iconic images of Viking lore. It's a dramatic, gruesome scene, one that captures the brutality and the romanticized heroism of the Viking Age. But did it actually happen? That's the question that historians have wrestled with for centuries. In addition to his Northumbrian exploits, Ragnar is also credited with launching a daring attack on Paris in 845. According to some accounts, he sailed up the Seine River with a Viking fleet, terrorizing the city and extorting a large ransom from the Frankish king, Charles the Bald. In verified historical records, a Viking leader named Ragnarus, a Latinized form of Ragnar, is indeed mentioned as attacking Paris around this time. This lends some circumstantial evidence to the idea that Ragnar might have been more than just a legendary figure. However, the name Ragnarus doesn't conclusively prove that he was the same Ragnar of later saga fame. Scholars argue that several Viking leaders could have been conflated or combined into a single legendary persona over the centuries, creating the composite figure of Lothbrok. The sagas themselves are a blend of historical fact, oral tradition, and outright fantasy. They were written down in Iceland in the 13th century, centuries after the events they purport to describe. This time gap allows for significant embellishment and the blending of fact and fiction. Saxo Grammaticus, who wrote the Gesta Danorum in the late 12th century, provides a detailed account of Ragnar's life and exploits, but his work is also considered a mixture of history and legend. To understand the difficulties in unraveling Ragnar's historicity, it's important to consider the nature of Viking Age sources. The Vikings themselves often left behind no written histories or chronicles. Most of what we know about them comes from the accounts of their enemies, Anglo-Saxon, Frankish, and Irish chroniclers, who often portrayed the Vikings as brutal, godless raiders. These accounts can be biased, contradictory, and incomplete. Even the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, one of the more reliable sources for Viking activity in England, offers only brief mentions of particular raids or individuals. Norse people of the time did produce written records, but they came in the form of runestones. Runestones were often raised, with the explicit purpose of the person who paid for the runestone to brag, to make the person being honored sound like a hero from legend. But no runestone so far has mentioned Ragnar, but that doesn't mean they never did, or that one won't be found. Archaeology has also played a role in the search for Ragnar. Excavations of Viking sites in Scandinavia and the British Isles have yielded a wealth of artifacts, but none have directly confirmed the existence of a single individual named Ragnar Lothbrok. It's important to note that the sagas themselves sometimes portray events that span different time frames and attribute them to a single hero figure. The Great Heathen Army's invasion of England in 865, for example, is traditionally said to have been led by the sons of Ragnar, seeking vengeance for their father's death. Historically, we know that a large Viking army did indeed arrive in England around that time, leading to the downfall of several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. But it's not entirely certain whether this event was truly triggered by the sons of a singular Ragnar, or if the story was later romanticized to fit the heroic narrative of the sagas. Despite these historiographical challenges, the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok remains incredibly influential. He embodies many of the traits that modern audiences associate with Vikings: bravery, seafaring expertise, fierce loyalty, and a thirst for adventure and wealth. The drama associated with his supposed death, the snake pit, and his sons avenging him ensures that the story remains memorable and captivating. Ragnar also serves as a convenient focal point in narratives that would otherwise be diffuse. His existence ties together various Viking campaigns in England, Ireland, and the Frankish territories under one mythic banner. So, was Ragnar Lothbrok a real historical figure? The honest answer is we don't know for sure. The evidence is ambiguous, contradictory, and often filtered through centuries of storytelling. Most scholars believe that the Ragnar of the sagas is likely a composite figure, a legendary hero, whose exploits are based on the deeds of multiple Viking leaders. But the possibility remains that a real Viking chieftain named Ragnar, or something similar, did exist, and did inspire some of the stories that have come down to us. The land of Punt, a name that whispers of ancient mysteries, exotic riches, and a location that has eluded scholars for centuries. This fabled land, mentioned in Egyptian texts dating back to the Old Kingdom, was a source of immense fascination and valuable trade goods for the ancient Egyptians. Imagine a land of abundance, a place where fragrant incense trees grew in profusion, where gold and ivory were readily available, where exotic animals roamed freely. This was the land of Punt, as described by the Egyptians. Scholars generally agree that Punt was located somewhere along the Red Sea coastline, potentially encompassing parts of modern-day Eritrea, Somalia, Djibouti, and eastern Sudan. But its precise borders, its exact location, remain a matter of debate. It's a geographical puzzle that has intrigued historians and archaeologists for generations. One of the earliest known references to Punt appears in the Palermo stone, an ancient Egyptian artifact that documents royal annals dating back to the 5th dynasty, around 2400 BC. These records indicate that the Egyptians sent expeditions to Punt to acquire valuable resources, most notably frankincense and myrrh. These aromatic resins were essential for religious ceremonies and for the embalming of the dead, highlighting the importance of trade relations with Punt. The Egyptians valued these commodities so highly that they were willing to undertake long and arduous journeys to obtain them. The most famous expedition to Punt took place during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut in the 15th century BC. Extensive carvings at her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri vividly depict this grand voyage. These detailed reliefs show a fleet of Egyptian ships sailing down the Red Sea, laden with goods, and returning with treasures from Punt. The images depict the people of Punt presenting the Egyptians with gold, ebony, giraffes, monkeys, and large bundles of fragrant incense trees. These depictions provide valuable clues about the environment and the culture of Punt, but they don't pinpoint its exact location. The images of incense-bearing trees, giraffes, and other African wildlife strongly support the idea that Punt was located somewhere within the Horn of Africa region. Some scholars have suggested that the kingdom of Punt could have occupied both sides of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the narrow waterway that separates Yemen from Africa. The distance across the strait is relatively short, about 15 miles, and would not have required advanced navigational skills to cross. This theory suggests a possible connection between Punt and both Africa and Arabia. Archaeological evidence has also contributed pieces to the puzzle. Pollen analysis from ancient incense containers suggests that some of the species of plants mentioned in Egyptian texts are consistent with those found in the Horn of Africa. Additionally, descriptions of the Punt landscape, with its lush vegetation, myrrh trees, and tropical habitats, align closely with certain areas in the Red Sea coastal plains. Nevertheless, until more definitive archaeological discoveries are made, the precise borders of Punt will likely remain elusive. Over time, references to the land of Punt in Egyptian texts became rarer. This could be due to shifting political alliances, changing trade routes, or the decline of certain Egyptian dynasties. Egypt's power waned significantly following the downfall of the New Kingdom around 1070 BC, and economic ties with foreign regions became more complicated. By the late period of Egyptian history from the 7th century BC, until the conquest by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. The land of Punt had largely receded into the mists of legend. It became a semi-mythical place, a land of fabled riches that was no longer directly accessible to the Egyptians. However, the memory of Punt persisted. Greek and Roman geographers, writing centuries later, recounted stories of distant African lands filled with untold wealth, echoing the earlier Egyptian accounts. But unlike the Egyptians, neither the Greeks nor the Romans had direct access to this region. Notably, the autonomous region in northern Somalia has named itself Puntland in modern times, drawing a connection to the fabled land of the past. This is a modern naming convention, a symbolic link to a historical legacy. The land of Punt, like so many historical mysteries, remains a blend of fact and speculation. We have tantalizing clues, fragments of information from ancient texts and archaeological discoveries, but the complete picture remains elusive. It's a reminder that the past is often shrouded in mystery, that even the most seemingly well-documented civilizations can leave behind unanswered questions. The Greek pyramids. The term itself sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? When we think of pyramids, we immediately picture the majestic structures of Egypt, towering monuments to pharaohs and ancient gods. But Greece, too, has its own enigmatic pyramidal structures, smaller and far less famous, but equally intriguing. These so-called Greek pyramids are primarily located in the Argolid region of Greece, a land steeped in ancient history and mythology. The most well-known of these is the Pyramid of Hellinikon, near the village of Elliniko. It's a modest structure, far from the scale of its Egyptian counterparts, but its purpose and origins have sparked considerable debate among archaeologists. Unlike the smooth soaring pyramids of Egypt, the Pyramid of Hellinikon is more trapezoidal in shape, constructed from large, irregularly shaped limestone blocks. Its dimensions are relatively small, with a base measuring roughly 12.5 meters by 14 meters. The dating of these Greek pyramids is a major point of contention. Early investigations suggested that they could have been constructed between 2500 and 2000 BC, overlapping with the period when the great Egyptian pyramids were being built. This led to speculation about possible connections or influences between the two cultures. However, more modern dating techniques, such as thermoluminescence dating, have yielded significantly later dates, suggesting that the Greek pyramids were constructed sometime in the first millennium BC, possibly in the 4th century BC, or even later. This revised dating throws a wrench into the theories of direct Egyptian influence. So, if these structures aren't ancient tombs like the Egyptian pyramids, what were they? That's the central mystery. Several theories have been proposed. Some scholars have suggested that the Pyramid of Hellinikon was a tomb or a mass grave, as was often implied by ancient sources, like Pausanias, a Greek traveler and writer who documented such monuments in the 2nd century AD. However, others have argued that the structure was more likely used as a small fortress or a watchtower, potentially serving agricultural or defensive functions. This interpretation aligns with the internal design features, such as walls, cisterns, and water supplies, which are atypical for a purely funerary structure. The trapezoidal blocks used in the construction are reminiscent of other defensive structures from the classical period, and the small rooms and secured doors further indicate a non-funerary use. The theory that the pyramids were related to Egyptian influence is largely unsupported by concrete evidence. While some have speculated about the presence of Egyptian mercenaries or cultural exchange influencing these structures, the evidence does not convincingly support a direct connection. Instead, it appears that these Greek pyramids may have evolved from a localized Greek tradition utilizing construction methods and purposes distinct from those of Egypt. Notably, many scholars dispute the usage of the term pyramid in relation to these structures at all, preferring the term fortified building or pyramidal structure.
This reflects the uncertainty surrounding their function and the desire to avoid misleading comparisons with the Egyptian pyramids. Further complicating the issue, the Greek Ministry of Culture has been hesitant to officially designate these structures as pyramids, instead referring to Hellenikon as a fortified building. This reflects the ongoing debate and the lack of definitive answers. The mystery of the Greek pyramids, like so many of the enigmas we've explored, highlights the limitations of our knowledge of the past. We have fragmented evidence, conflicting interpretations, and a persistent sense of uncertainty. But the very act of questioning, of exploring these alternative possibilities, enriches our understanding of ancient cultures and the diverse ways in which they shape their world. The Kushite language, a linguistic puzzle that has baffled scholars for over a century. This ancient language, once spoken in the kingdoms of Kush and Meroe in what is now Sudan, remains largely undeciphered, a testament to the challenges of reconstructing lost languages and cultures. The Kushites, a powerful civilization that flourished along the Nile River south of Egypt, were at the zenith of their power from 754 to 656 BC, when they invaded Egypt and established Egypt's 25th dynasty. Their language, also commonly referred to as Meroitic, is believed to belong to the Nilo-Saharan language family, which includes various languages spoken across Central and Eastern Africa. However, confirming that classification has proven incredibly difficult, mainly because scholars can't fully translate the existing body of Kushite texts. We have the script, we have inscriptions, but we can't fully grasp the meaning behind the words. Francis Griffith, a British Egyptologist, made significant strides in deciphering the Kushite script in 1909. He identified the phonetic values of the characters, but his work hasn't yielded a complete understanding of the vocabulary and grammar. It's like having the alphabet of a foreign language, but not the dictionary or the grammar rules. Kushite scripts exist in two main forms, hieroglyphic and cursive. Both share some visual similarities with Egyptian hieroglyphs, but they function differently, with unique symbols representing distinct phonetic values. Our knowledge of Kushite is based on approximately 1,300 inscriptions that have been uncovered so far. Many of these are short funerary texts or royal inscriptions, found on temples, stelae, and even personal items like jewelry. While these inscriptions are invaluable, scholars struggle because of the limited variety of subject matter and the relative lack of extensive bilingual texts. Unlike the famous Rosetta Stone, which helped decode Egyptian hieroglyphs by providing the same passage in multiple languages, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic script, and ancient Greek, there isn't a Kushite equivalent. There are a few inscriptions in Kushite and Greek side by side, but these typically only mention proper nouns and titles, providing limited insight into everyday vocabulary or grammatical structures. The current status of our understanding of Kushite can be described as a partial breakthrough rather than a full decipherment. We're aware of some grammatical forms, and we can occasionally recognize names of deities, royal figures, and place names. But we still can't translate
Scholars from around the
entire
world
texts
continue
with
to
confidence.
propose theories regarding the language's grammar, syntax, and lexicon. Excavations in Sudan sometimes yield additional inscriptions or artifacts, but it's rare to find something that radically alters our interpretive framework. With the rise of digital analysis in the humanities, researchers are using computational methods to compare Kushite with other languages in the Nilo-Saharan family. It's hoped that these methods may help crack the code and unlock our knowledge of this mysterious language. The Kushite language, like the other mysteries we've explored, represents a gap in our understanding of the past. It's a reminder that entire civilizations, with their rich cultures, histories, and languages, can fade into obscurity, leaving behind only tantalizing fragments. But the ongoing efforts to decipher Kushite demonstrate the enduring human desire to connect with the past, to understand the voices of those who came before us. Berserkers, The very word evokes images of fearsome Viking warriors, consumed by a battle rage that made them seemingly invincible. These legendary figures, prominent in Norse sagas and historical accounts, occupy a unique and somewhat mysterious place in Viking history. The word berserker is derived from an Old Norse term, which translates roughly to bear shirt in English. This reflects their close association with bear shamanism and their practice of wearing animal pelts, often those of bears, into battle. These warriors were famed for their ability to enter a trance-like state of unbridled fury, known as berserker gang. This state was characterized by a number of distinct traits: immense physical strength, a seeming immunity to pain, and an overwhelming aggression that struck terror into their enemies. In this state, berserkers were described as impervious to fire and iron, able to withstand blows that would fell ordinary men. These claims are often regarded as hyperbole or myth, but they reflect the awe and fear that these warriors inspire. Some historians have suggested that the berserker gang may have been induced by consuming psychoactive substances, such as hallucinogenic mushrooms. This theory is contentious, but it aligns with shamanic practices found in various cultures, which often involve altered states of consciousness to connect with the spiritual or animalistic world. Bear shamanism played a central role in the berserkers' idea. In Norse mythology, the bear symbolized immense power, ferocity, and resilience, qualities that berserkers sought to emulate. By wearing bear skins and adopting bear-like behaviors, these warriors aimed to embody the spirit of the bear, merging human and animal characteristics. It's been speculated that the initiation rituals for becoming a berserker may have included consuming the vital organs of a bear, a symbolic act intended to acquire the animal's essence and strength. The process of transformation into a berserker likely involved elaborate rituals, though the precise details are lost to time. These may have included chanting, rhythmic dancing, and fasting, all designed to prepare the warrior mentally and physically for the berserker gang. Some historical accounts describe berserkers as biting their shields or howling like animals before combat, further emphasizing their departure from human norms and their alignment with animalistic fury. The berserkers, while fearsome, were not simply uncontrolled brutes. They often served as elite warriors in the retinues of kings and chieftains, valued for their combat prowess and their ability to inspire terror in the enemy. However, their unpredictable nature and their association with pagan rituals also made them figures of suspicion and fear, particularly as Christianity began to spread throughout Scandinavia. The berserkers, like so many aspects of Viking culture, are shrouded in a mix of historical fact and legendary embellishment. They represent a fascinating and somewhat unsettling aspect of the Viking world, a reminder of the power of belief, ritual, and the human capacity for both extraordinary courage and terrifying violence. The glass delusion, a bizarre and unsettling psychiatric phenomenon that swept through Europe during the late Middle Ages and early modern period. Individuals suffering from this delusion believed, with unwavering conviction, that they were made of glass and that any sudden movement or impact would cause them to shatter into pieces. Imagine living with the constant fear that the slightest touch, a gentle breeze, even a loud noise, could shatter your fragile body. This was the reality for those afflicted with the glass delusion. These individuals often refused to be touched or even approached, convinced that the slightest contact could break their glass-like bodies. They might sit motionless for hours, wrapped in thick blankets, or wear specially made garments reinforced with iron rods to protect themselves. The glass delusion was most frequently observed among the educated upper classes, nobles, scholars, and members of the clergy. This suggests that it may have been linked to the intellectual and social pressures of the time. One of the most famous sufferers of the glass delusion was King Charles VI of France, who lived from 1368 to 14. During his bouts of insanity, Charles became convinced that his body was entirely made of glass. He refused to allow anyone to touch him, and took elaborate precautions to avoid shattering. He would sit motionless for hours, sometimes wrapped in thick blankets, and he even wore specially made garments reinforced with iron rods, described as iron ribs, to safeguard his supposedly fragile glass organ. These bizarre behaviors earned him the epithet Charles the Mad among later historians. Charles VI's case is often cited as the first known instance of the glass delusion,
and it vividly illustrates how real and debilitating this belief was for the afflicted individual. In the 15th through 17th centuries, the glass delusion cropped up in royal courts, monasteries, and universities across Europe. An influential 16th century account by a court physician told of an unnamed nobleman who believed he was made of glass, specifically a glass. This nobleman reportedly spent long periods lying on a bed of straw to avoid cracking himself. According to the story, his doctor devised a dramatic cure. He set the straw on fire and locked the door, forcing the panicked patient to frantically pound on the walls for help. When the man didn't shatter from this vigorous slamming, the doctor allegedly challenged his delusion, and the nobleman came to realize that he wasn't truly made of glass. This anecdote, whether apocryphal or factual, suggests that even in the 1500s, doctors recognized the delusion as a false belief and attempted creative psychological interventions to treat it. Many variations of the glass delusion were documented. Some patients believed only a part of their body was glass, a glass head, glass arms, or a glass heart, that could splinter inside them. A particularly widespread fear, apparently affecting men in particular, was that the sufferer had acquired a glass. Men who held this belief would avoid sitting down without some padding, fearing that their posterior would shatter upon contact with a hard seat. Contemporary medical theory in the late medieval and Renaissance periods explained the glass delusion within the prevailing framework of melancholy. Melancholy, associated with an excess of black bile in traditional humoral medicine, was thought to produce all manner of fears and false beliefs. Robert Burton's The Anatomy of Melancholy, published in 1621, famously catalogues a variety of bizarre delusions afflicting people with melancholy. He noted that some people believe they're made of glass, while others believe they're made of lead, cork, or other materials. Treatments were largely empirical and compassionate in nature. Physicians might gently reason with patients, or, as in the case of the straw fire cure, try to shock the patient back to his senses. The approach indicates that doctors understood the problem to lie in the patient's belief, rather than in any physical issues within the body. Modern scholars have proposed additional explanations for why the glass delusion appeared when and where it did. Glass in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance was a relatively rare and valuable material, associated with fragility, transparency, and a certain degree of prestige. One psychological interpretation is that cases like King Charles VI represent early descriptions of severe mental illness on the psychotic spectrum. Retrospective diagnosis is speculative, but some historians and psychiatrists have suggested that Charles VI's condition might be described today as schizophrenia, or schizoaffective disorder. Chronic schizophrenia often involves false beliefs about one's body, and the glass delusion could be seen as a culturally shaped version of that clinical phenomenon. Notably, the glass delusion was both time-bound and culture. By the late 17th century, cases of glass delusion had all but disappeared, with only a few isolated cases reported in the following centuries. The rise of scientific rationalism, the decline of humoral medicine, and changing cultural attitudes towards mental illness likely contributed to the disappearance of this peculiar delusion. Hyperborea, a name that evokes a mythical land of eternal spring, a northern paradise beyond the reach of the cold north wind. In Greek mythology, Hyperborea was a legendary realm, a place of perpetual sunshine, abundant harvests, and a blessed people who lived in harmony with the gods. Imagine a land where the sun never truly sets, where sickness and old age are unknown, where life is a perpetual celebration. This was Hyperborea, as envisioned by the ancient Greeks. Hyperborea was said to be located far to the north, beyond the realm of Boreas, the god of the north wind. It was a place so remote, so inaccessible, that only heroes or favored mortals could reach it. It was a symbol of an unattainable ideal, a northern utopia. One of the earliest references to Hyperborea appears in a fragment of Hesiod's Catalogue of Women from the 8th century. By the 5th century BC, the poet Pindar provided a vivid description of this land in his Pythian odes. Pindar wrote that Apollo, the god of light and music, spent the winter among the Hyperboreans. He portrayed their country as a utopia, a place where people never got sick or old, and never had to engage in heavy labor or fight. In another ode, Pindar describes the hero Heracles traveling to Hyperborea, chasing a doe, a female deer, beyond the Danube River. This suggests a connection between Hyperborea and the far northern regions of Europe, beyond the known world of the Greeks. The historian Herodotus, who lived in the 5th century BC, provided the earliest surviving prose account of the Hyperboreans. Herodotus reported that the Hyperboreans lived beyond the nomadic tribes of the far north. He recounted a tradition that offerings from the Hyperboreans were passed from one northern tribe to the next, until they eventually reached the Greek temple of Apollo on Delos. Despite recording these legends, Herodotus expressed skepticism about the literal existence of Hyperborea. He noted the uncertainty of such tales, and wryly concluded that if there really are Hyperboreans, there must be an equally fantastical people living far to the south, in the extreme heat. Herodotus, in essence, treated Hyperborea as a curious hearsay from earlier poets, a tale he was willing to document but not fully endorse as factual. In the late 4th century BC, the Greek writer Hecataeus of Abdera compiled a comprehensive work on the Hyperboreans, synthesizing the various legends circulating by that time. Although Hecataeus's treatise on the Hyperboreans is lost, portions survive through later authors, like Diodorus Siculus. According to Diodorus, writing in the 1st century BC, Hecataeus described Hyperborea as a real island in the regions beyond the land of the Celts, in the broad ocean to the far north. This island was said to be no smaller than Sicily, extremely fertile, with a mild climate that yielded 2 harvests per year. Hecataeus linked Hyperborea closely with Apollo's worship. He wrote that the god's mother, Leto, was born on this island, and that the Hyperboreans honored Apollo above all other gods. The island supposedly housed a magnificent circular temple of Apollo, adorned with many offerings, and its inhabitants, acting as the god's priests, continuously sang and played lyres. Some scholars believe this description was an early attempt to identify Hyperborea with a specific place. For instance, the large island beyond Gaul could correspond to Britain, especially given the references to a circular temple, which later writers even compared to Stonehenge. The British Isles are extremely fertile, and the climate is mild, especially relative to their geographical location. Whether or not Hecataeus literally meant Britain, his portrayal treated Hyperborea as a tangible northern land, blending myth with geographic speculation. Writers of the Roman era continued to refer to Hyperborea, often echoing earlier Greek notions. Roman poets and scholars used Hyperborean as a byword for the extreme north, or an idealized faraway people. For example, the poet Virgil and the statesman Cicero both alluded to the Hyperboreans when speaking of an exceedingly remote, blissful place. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History from the 1st century AD, mentions the Hyperboreans as a people living far to the north, allegedly reaching ages of up to 1,000 years. As knowledge of the world expanded, later writers tried to reconcile the Hyperborea legend with real geography. In the 2nd century AD, writers attempted to tie the Ural Mountains in what is now Russia to the legend, and various steppe peoples, such as the Scythians, were roped into the narrative. Modern scholarship generally views Hyperborea as a blend of myth and limited ancient knowledge of northern lands. Historians note that Greek contact with peoples north of the Black Sea and along the Danube in the early Iron Age may have inspired elements of the Hyperborean legend. Amber trade routes from the Baltic and reports of strange lands of the midnight sun likely filtered down to the Mediterranean, seeding the idea of a faraway land where the sun barely set. The legend that the sun rose and set only once a year in Hyperborea has invited comparisons to the Arctic Circle, where polar day and night each last 6 months. Mainstream historians tend to conclude that Hyperborea was not a specific place, but rather a symbolic composite. It was a reflection of Greek encounters with distant tribes, combined with imagination about lands of perpetual light and plenty beyond the reach of the harsh north wind. That said, some theories propose that it may have described the British Isles, even if this theory isn't widely accepted. The blend of myth, geographical speculation, and cultural projection makes Hyperborea a fascinating example of how ancient peoples constructed their understanding of the world. The Tsavo Manida, a chilling tale of 2 lions that terrorized a railway construction project in Kenya in 1898, claiming the lives of dozens of workers and creating a legend that endures to this day. In March 1898, the British Empire embarked on an ambitious project, the construction of a railway bridge over the Tsavo River in present-day Kenya. This railway was intended to connect Uganda's interior to the Indian Ocean, a strategic move to consolidate British economic and political control over East Africa. What should have been a straightforward engineering feat, however, devolved into a 9-month nightmare when 2 male lions began systematically hunting and devouring the workers. These lions, dubbed the Tsavo man-eaters, became infamous for their boldness, intelligence, and unprecedented focus on humans as prey. The Tsavo region, a sprawling wilderness of thorny scrubland and rocky outcrops, was and still is a harsh ecosystem teeming with wildlife. For the British, building the Uganda Railway through this terrain was a challenging undertaking. Thousands of Indian laborers and local African workers were recruited for the project, which required back-breaking labor under extreme conditions. The railway's progress, however, came to an abrupt halt in late 1898, when the lions began their attacks. Workers initially dismissed the disappearances, blaming them on desertions or the more routine crocodile attacks they'd become accustomed to. But as bodies were discovered near campfires and tents, panic set in. It became clear that lions were responsible for these gruesome deaths. The lions, unlike typical predators, showed no fear of humans. They tore through flimsy barriers, dragged victims from tents, and even prowled the workers' campsites in daylight. By December 1898, the death toll had risen so sharply that construction halted entirely. Workers fled, and the project's chief engineer, Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, found himself tasked with not just building a bridge, but stopping these man-eating beasts. Patterson, an experienced big-game hunter, initially underestimated the lion. He set traps and ambushes, but the lions seemed to evade them with eerie precision. In his memoir The Man-Eaters of Tsavo, he described their uncanny shrewdness and almost supernatural ability to avoid danger. The attacks were gruesomely methodical. The lions rarely ate their victims entirely, often abandoning half-eaten bodies near the camp, a behavior that fueled speculation about their motives. Some workers believed the lions were evil spirits, or creatures summoned by powerful magicians employed by tribes who opposed the railway. Patterson, however, recognized that the predators were likely driven by opportunity. With the railway disrupting their habitat and traditional prey diminished by drought or disease, humans, largely unarmed and concentrated in camps, became easy targets. After numerous failed attempts, Patterson finally eliminated the first lion on December 9, 1898, and the second 3 weeks later. He recounted that the first lion measured nearly 9 feet long and required 8 shots to bring down. The second, shot after a tense pursuit, was similarly massive. Their manelessness, a common trait among Tsavo lions, added to their somewhat disturbing appearance. The exact number of victims of these lions remains debated. Patterson claimed 105 deaths, but modern scholars suggest a more conservative estimate of around. This discrepancy might stem from Patterson exaggerating for dramatic effect, or conflating lion-related deaths with those from other causes. Regardless, the attacks were unprecedented in scale and impact. The question remains, why did these lions target humans? One theory points to environmental stress. The 1890s saw severe droughts and a rinderpest epidemic that decimated buffalo and other prey. With natural food sources scarce, the lions may have turned to humans as a readily available alternative. Another popular theory is based on dental evidence. One of the lions had a broken canine and an abscess, which would have made hunting large, struggling prey painful. Humans, with their relatively thin hides and lack of natural defenses, would have been easier targets. Another factor that can't be overlooked was the railway itself. The construction disrupted the lions' territory, forcing them into closer contact with humans. The camps, with their noise and activity, likely desensitized the lions to human presence, eroding their instinctive caution. And as a pack of two, they wouldn't have had the numbers, or perhaps the lion power to go up against a larger pride. The Tsavo man-eater story didn't end with their death. Patterson had used their pelts as rugs. He kept their skins and skulls as trophies. He later sold them to the Field Museum in Chicago, where they are to this day. Their reconstructed forms, though lacking the menace of life, serve as a haunting reminder of their reign of terror and the enduring mystery of their man-eating behavior. And so, our journey through these shadowed corridors of history comes to an end. We've traversed continents, delved into ancient mysteries, and encountered figures both real and legendary. From the enigmatic Kensington runestone to the chilling tale of the Tsavo man-eaters, we've explored the enduring power of the unknown, the persistent questions that linger in the gaps of our historical understanding. These mysteries, ultimately, are more than just puzzles to be solved. They're reflections of our own curiosity, our innate desire to connect with the past, to make sense of the world around us. They remind us that history is not a static, fixed narrative, but a constantly evolving tapestry of stories, interpretations, and unanswered questions. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. Until next time, keep your minds open, your curiosity alive, and remember, the past is full of secrets, waiting to be uncovered.